Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with one of my sheroes, Geneen Roth. Hi.
Sheroes.
Yes.
Sounds a little bit like Cheerios.
I know, I have to enunciate that,
Yes.
otherwise it gets weird. I've been hearing, Janine, that you've wanted a pussy hat, but no one has made one for you. So I wanted to start off the night. You don't have to wear it because your hair looks amazing right now, but this is for you.
This is very, very good because I've been craving a pussy hat. I was telling Krista that before the march last January, I really, really wanted one. I don't knit, or else I haven't knit since I knit Matt a vest that he didn't wear because it was too itchy.
Where is Matt?
Yeah, Matt's over there. I can see him anywhere.
Hi.
Hi, honey. Anyway, my office manager made them for everybody. Her sister, her cousin, and not for me. And now, I know, don't you feel sorry for me? Yeah, really. Now I have one. I love it. And inside is your book.
It's my book. Like, my book happens to fit inside pussy hats. That wasn't planned, but now it's like my way of, presenting them together.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, and by the way, so in my book, in the suggested resources, guess what I have in it? I have Mr. Geneen Roth's book in my suggested resources, and I don't know if you knew that, but I'm really pleased to be with you tonight. I'm so excited. I know I'm amongst Janeen's friends who probably have known her work for a long time, but I just thought I would talk a little bit about how I got to know Janeen's work. I was in my mid-20s, and I was recommended the book Women, Food, and God. How many people have read that? Yeah. Just a #1 New York Times bestseller, no big deal, right? So I have to admit, when I first read it, I read it in sort of this smug manner. It's like, oh, I already know all these things. I'll just read through it, and I don't have trouble with eating. I'm not anorexic, I'm not fat, I don't binge. I'm just going to read this out of intellectual curiosity, right? And I enjoyed it, but really luckily, a few years later, in 2016, I was 28, and just a few months before I invented the pussy hat, I picked up Janeen's book again. And I read it, and this time I realized I really had a problem. I wasn't obese or diagnosed with anything with eating, but every day I would be so hungry. Ravenous, hangry, as people say, hunger and anger together. So, one of the things Janeen teaches is the way you eat is the way you do anything in life. And when I really broke down what was going on with my eating schedule, why in a first world country where I have a refrigerator and Whole Foods and everything, am I so hungry every day? And for me, it came from a weird need to maximize everything. I would get up, and there wouldn't be food in the fridge, so I'd be I ought to get groceries and then cook, because that's the nutritious, frugal thing to do. But I was also hungry now, so I thought maybe I'll go to the convenience store and grab something. I was no. I'll go, it's not delicious. I'll go somewhere else and get a meal or get takeout, but that's not frugal. I just talked myself out of all these eating options until in the afternoon, I hadn't eaten anything. And it was really silly, but also why am I doing this to myself? And my friend calls it the mental shitstorm, that you kind of put yourself on. So I realized that the way I ate, attempting to maximize my options, and yet ultimately doing nothing and going hungry, was how I was doing everything in life, especially when it came to my time. And I wouldn't begin projects because I couldn't do it in a perfect manner. So I really took her book to heart and decided that I would go I was 28, and I wonder, when you decided to stop dieting, were you around 28? Were you in your late 20s? I feel like I've read that somewhere.
Something like that.
Yeah. So I decided to do the same thing, except with my time. And oddly enough, because the Pussy Hat wasn't around then, I called them pussy schedules, because I got to follow my intuition. So where Janine ate intuitively what she wanted, I spent my time intuitively. And it was really amazing. So spring of 2016, all the way till November, I was using my time intuitively as inspired by women, food, and God. And had I not done that, I guarantee you I wouldn't have gotten addicted to knitting, because why, like, there's no rational reason why in LA I should be knitting. But I started doing that all the time, and if I wasn't on my self-imposed pussy schedule, which is basically a lack of a schedule because I was following my intuition. It was a lack of a time diet, so to speak. And because of that, I think I was in the right mindset creatively for the Pussy Hat to come to me, the idea to come to me, and for me to be like, I've got to do this. So some of you might have seen floating around social media a little drawing I put together where I'm holding Janine's book and dreaming up the Pussy Hat, but that's why I put that together, because I feel like she has done so much. And for me, her book resulted in the Pussy Hat, but for each of you, her books and her retreats might have resulted in a miracle in your life. So I'm really grateful to be here.
Thank you, Krista. That was lovely.
You're so welcome. I'm so grateful to have a chance to tell you that in person.
Yeah. And, I think maybe I'd like to start out just by reading a piece from the book, because I keep hearing from people that they love to be read to. And somebody asked me before, was I going to read tonight?
Yes.
So I think I will start out by reading a piece called The Blue Vest, and set a particular tone. We saw it in the window of a store on a side street in San Francisco, the piece of clothing for which I'd been waiting without knowing I'd been waiting. Come and be enthralled, it whispered. Let my fringes anoint you. I slipped into the floor-length vest like a swan would slip into her wings, and I glided around the room as if the store was my lake. As I passed the rows of jackets and racks of shoes, I felt like Harry Potter in his invisibility cloak, except that mine was made of manifest blue enchantment. Do you like it? I asked my husband when I emerged from the swoon. Although Matt's wardrobe consists mainly of rugby shirts, khaki pants, and New Balance shoes in various stages of wear, he has uncanny wisdom when it comes to women's sartorial plumage. Where might you wear this? He asked, eyeing the shimmering blue fabric. It doesn't seem appropriate to wear around the house or to Whole Foods. Oh yeah, that's right. We live in the country down a mile-long gravel road where our daily companions are owls, oak trees, and deer. I told Scott, the salesperson, that although I really did like the vest and was surprised my husband didn't have to don his sunglasses to tolerate its blinding beauty, I'd call in a few days to see if it was still there. At dinner with friends that night, the conversation was lively, but visions of blue distracted me. The way the vest pooled around my legs, changed colors, became indigo, then cobalt, then slate. Wearing it is like wearing the ocean, I thought, as I took a bite of Caesar salad. And although it's true I can't wear it to plant radishes in the garden, I have to wear something to restaurants or lectures. Why not this? The next morning, I decided to buy the vest. But as I started walking to the phone, the fight with myself began. I want to be the kind of person who is no longer enchanted by things. I need to meditate more. Disengage from my thoughts, not buy more clothes. Because when I am on my deathbed, which is closer now than it was last year or the year before, having a blue vest won't matter. And I want to spend my energy on what does. As I skulked to the bathroom, I decided that I really was hopeless, a spiritual failure. Then, as I was brushing my teeth, I thought, but in that case, why not be hopeless in a blue vest? It shouldn't be a conundrum, but it is. I shouldn't love things, but I do. Although I am well aware that you become what you love, as the Sufis say, I don't seem to be able to help being who I am or loving what I love, especially beauty in its myriad forms. The dazzle of first morning light, my motorcycle boots with a red rhinestone boot belt, Matt's face, a blue vest. To the extent that there is a quandary, it is with my belief that beauty is defined by its forms, particularly those that are young and dewy-faced, or silky and impractical. As a teenager, after reading hundreds of glamour magazines, I was convinced that the antidote to feeling ugly was to become an actress or a model. In 8th grade, I told my classmates I'd been cast as an orphan in the Broadway show Oliver, in which Bartley Larson, one of our friends, was already starring. Unfortunately, since the whole class was given season's tickets to the show, and I never once appeared in it, they discovered I had an elastic relationship with the truth. In 10th grade, I played the role of an ailing debutante in a skit opposite my real-life heartthrob, Martin Howard, and bombed so completely that in the auditorium of a few hundred people, only my mother clapped when I took my bow. I know. Really. But at least she clapped. Undeterred in my attempts to mesmerize people, I decided to become a model. Wearing a white A-line dress with pale blue lines and looking like a well-outfitted tent, I renamed myself Janine Howard, dragged my brother to the Barbizon School of Modeling in Manhattan, and presented myself to the receptionist. She asked me to get on the scale. I weighed 110 pounds, told me I was too fat, and that my legs were too short. When it became obvious that a trend of 5'3" models would not begin with me, I narrowed my focus to keeping my skin smooth, my muscles toned, and my hair shiny. It worked, until it didn't. At 30, I looked like I was in high school. At 40 or 55, I looked like I was 30. But at 65, I could walk down the street with my hair on fire, as my friend Catherine says, and no one would notice. Although I still feel youngish, and that everyone my age is an adult, whereas I am merely in disguise, as Margaret Atwood puts it, I am still somewhat shocked when I asked for a senior discount at the movie theater, and there is no protest. If I see a friend for the first time in a few years, I wonder whether he's had a stroke or is dying because he looks so diminished. And then I realize he's probably wondering the same thing about me. Despite the fact that everyone who doesn't die young gets old, I must have believed that getting older was a choice. And since I wasn't making it, it wouldn't happen to me. Just as I used to stand in front of the mirror, now I pull back, just as I used to stand in front of the mirror and pull back the fat on my thighs to see what they would look like if I lost 20 pounds, I now pull back, or used to anyway, before I wrote this piece, which changed everything, kind of, for 10 minutes and then sometimes longer. I pull back what Anne Lamott calls the Utah desert on my neck to see what I would look like without it. It's as if I fantasize that looking younger will give something back to me that I lost beside my chin, or that there's only one way to see the lines around my eyes or the folds above them as traitors to be vanquished. Since I've ruled out plastic surgery for many reasons, I'm left with either fighting the ever-increasing effects of having lived this long or taking time out to reconsider the meaning of beauty. Years ago, my teacher Jean told me to think of my eyes as catcher's mitts. See what is there, she said, and allow yourself to take it in. Be filled by what you see, which reminded me of what the novelist Albert Kosary wrote. So much beauty, so few eyes to see it. Could it be that beauty is about seeing and not being seen? And that though a particular form is the transport mechanism, the way that bread is the delivery system for butter, it is the effect of beauty, the rapture of it, that actually elevates and inspires. And while it's true that I've had moments of rapture when I was acceptably attractive, I also had months of melancholy. My well-defined neck was not causative in either the rapture or the melancholy. The only thing, and I've traveled the earth looking, that has brought me ever-present joy is to see what I see, wake up to the splendor in small things, and appreciate, appreciate, appreciate. Which brings me back to you know what. It is rather striking, Matt said, when I opened the UPS package in which the blue vest was nested. And when you wear it, you can quote Liberace and say, I did not come here to go unnoticed. I reminded myself that Matt has so many fine qualities. Humor, generosity, a heart as wide as the Grand Canyon. And that in our many years together, he has stopped me from looking like a shrub and a bear, but that he's not always right. Sometimes he misses the point of adornment for the joy of it, which is, in my opinion, one of the splendors of having a body. And since that body comes with a multitude of challenges, it is important to revel in the available joys. The ancient philosopher Plotinus said, beauty must ever induce a wonderment and a delicious trouble, a trembling that is all delight. Now, instead of pulling back the skin on my neck, I wear the blue ocean to buy zucchini at the store. I go to parties, and when everyone else is wearing t-shirts and jeans, I'm dressed in blue enchantment, awash in delight. Thank you. Thank you.
Janine, I just caught something upon your reading of it. When you went to model and you said your name was Janine Howard, did that have to do with Martin Howard?
It did, but it also had to do with my brother, whose
Okay.
name was Howard.
Okay.
And who was the kindest, most wonderful brother, and let me drag him. Not only did I drag him to the Barbizon School of Modeling, but I used to drag him to the diet doctor every week to get the pills that I was addicted to for 4 years. And I made him go in to get the pills, and when I waited in the car. So he was just willing to do anything for me.
Aww.
And so that was in honor of him.
That's so sweet.
Yes.
Because I only made the connection later, like, wait a second, her crush, Martin
Yes,
Howard.
yes,
and
right.
Then, like,
Yes, yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I like to think of your creation, like just creations as, in general, as children, and you have a lot of them. You have 10 books, 10 children.
Yes.
And so this Messy, Magnificent Life is your 10th, and I'm curious, is it different from its siblings? Like, what's its personality like?
Well, yes, it is actually very different from my other books, but actually every book is different from every other book, and sort of comes as it will. Usually I start every book with a question that I don't know the answer to. And the book is the way that I find out the answer. Writing is the way that I know what I know that I didn't realize I knew before I started writing about it. For instance, writing that Blue Vest chapter was really helpful for me in going through the process of getting older and next. And I really have let go of it about the next, except when I haven't. But if I would sit down and read the piece again, it does remind me again, so I can just dip right into that. With this book, the question that I started the book with was, is it possible to live with well, let me backtrack and say that I found myself, despite the good fortune and the multiple blessings of my life, and I feel like I have many, I found myself living with some kind of very low-level anxiety and feeling old feelings that would haunt me of discontent or lack. And
I'm sure you're alone in that, right? Like,
right, nobody else has anxiety or discontent. And I wanted to know if it was possible, the way it had been possible with my relationship with food, because I really no longer have issues with food, which is shocking to me because I never ever thought that there'd ever come a time from the hell realm that I lived in for so long to get to a place where it's not an issue, it's not a cause of suffering, which doesn't mean that my relationship with food isn't refined all the time, but it's not a cause of suffering. And so I wanted to see if I use this similar ways that I used to handle my relationship with food, was it possible to do that in the rest of my life, so that I could experience the freedom and the joy, the spaciousness, the ease that I feel around food in day-to-day life. When I padded to the bathroom, when I talked to Matt, when I walked outside, when I woke up in the middle of the night. Was that possible? I had been meditating forever and been in therapy for as long, and somehow they each were very helpful, but they weren't translating to day-to-day life. And so that's what this book, Child, is about. And I didn't know the answer. And in the writing of it, which took 6 years, my books have taken anywhere from 3 weeks to 6 years. Wow. With this book, I didn't write on a deadline. I didn't sell a proposal. I didn't have a contract. I just wanted to do it the way I wanted to do it. And so it took a lot of years because I had to live everything that I wrote about before I wrote about it, or as I was writing about it. And so that's what makes this book different. And one thing that I want to point out that nobody but me is going to tell you, because nobody but me knows this, except if you've been to other book readings, besides how gorgeous this book cover is, because it has sparkly stars on it, and you can feel the sparkles on them. What else is true about this book cover is, see this gold moon? Well, they printed the first 42,000 copies without the gold moon, and the moon is a very important part of this book. And so they went back and they hand foiled gold moons on every single copy. So you will get a hand gold foiled moon tonight if you buy a book, when you buy a book, when you have a book. So I'm very thrilled with the gold moon.
You see the sparkles.
Yes, you can see the
beautiful.
sparkles. I know, and you can feel them too. If you put your, for me, as you can tell in the Blue Vest, what something looks like and feels like, and sort of the feeling you get is really important. And so that's why the cover was important. This book was originally called Snorkeling in the Night Sky. It's the last piece in the book, and I hope to read it tonight. But nobody could remember the title of it. And when I would say, they'd say, "What's the title of your book?" And I'd say, "Snorkeling in the Night Sky." And I loved that title. And first they'd look at me, huh? What does that mean exactly? And then 10 minutes later, they'd say something like, you know that book you're writing, Scuba Diving at Midnight? And it was then that I realized that Snorkeling in the Night Sky was really not the best title. But the book cover was from my idea for that, and then I just thought it's perfect for anything. I mean, it wouldn't be perfect for Pink Pussy Hats, though, because it's blue.
I can make anything work. It's just
Good.
all the selling,
Yeah,
the
we can
story
put a little
of it.
band of blue in the next pink, in the next pussy hat, and yeah.
Well, you know, I get really fixated on one song as I write or as I create, and it's funny you mention it because I was listening to country at the time of the Pussy Hat, and I didn't do it on purpose, but the song was called "Blue Ain't Your Color," and there's so much blue in your book, like the moodiness of this, snorkeling in the night sky, the blue vest. It's beautiful.
And blue isn't really in my color palette, really. According to the person who did it many, many years ago. So I don't wear a lot of blue, except for the blue vest, of course.
Of course.
Yes, right.
I do have a question for you. So from this messy, magnificent life, one takeaway I had was that peace and happiness might not look like what I thought it would look like. It might look messy or fat or poor instead of organized, thin, and rich. It might look like a blue vest or a very simple moment watching a hummingbird. And I want to ask you, what do you think happiness looks like? Is there a tip-off? Is there a common indicator amongst the happy, enlightened, spiritual people, like, is there a tip-off?
I wouldn't say, I know this is different from what happiness experts say, but I wouldn't say that happiness is ever a constant state. I would say it's in this moment, where is my attention? I am really a big believer in it's about here, now, where is my mind, what are my thoughts? And to me, happiness is not believing my thoughts. That's what happiness is. Because if you lived inside my mind, you would realize why happiness is like that. In fact, everybody's mind, to some extent, manufactures stories all the time. There's the situation, and when I caught on to this, I was writing this book. There's the situation, there's what's going on, and then there's the story about the situation. There's the situation, and then my interpretation of it. For instance, I'll give you an example. I had some friends who were going to come tonight. They said they were coming, and then they texted me this afternoon and said they weren't coming. And I immediately went into, the story I started telling myself about why they weren't coming is just a story. I have no idea if it's true or not, none. But it's with those stories that I entrance myself, make myself miserable, convince myself that I don't belong or that people don't love me or whatever it is. And so happiness is the second I disengage from the story that I am telling myself about the situation. That's what happiness is. Because the second I do that, there's lightness, there's a kind of freshness, and there's a giddiness almost. I would say it's a giddiness, a freedom of not being imprisoned by my own mind and my own negative stories.
I love the idea of the mind as a home, and you can make it a peaceful home. But I also love that you talk about the crazy ant in the attic that's
Right.
sometimes in our home. So how do you deal with that, and what is she? What is that crazy ant?
Yeah. So the crazy aunt in the attic, everybody's got one. You might not call it a crazy aunt. It might be a crazy uncle. It might be in Women, Food, and God, I called it the GPS from the Twilight Zone. So there's a voice that every single person develops by the time they're 4 years old. Superego is another name for it, inner critic, inner parent, inner judge. Everybody's got one. And most people, and I was, and it still takes work for me, so it's not that done and dusted, over, gone, never dealing with this again. Most people are merged with that voice. So what I realized is that was part of why I was waking up in some kind of low-level discontent, because I was telling myself a story, and usually it had to do with my top 3 themes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing. I feel like everybody's got at least 3, but definitely 3 main themes, top themes. They're, I'm unworthy, I'm not lovable, I don't belong. Mine has to do with the little match girl who is in that old myth, standing outside in the cold with rags on, barefoot, looking at the happy family on the other side of the glass window, roasting turkeys in little velvet dresses, hugging and kissing each other and opening Christmas presents. And the little match girl will never belong in that circle of love or warm. Will just never belong to that. Whatever those feelings are that she thinks they're all having, she's never going to have those. And so that can come up for me anywhere, at any time. I could see a picture of anything and suddenly go into that. And so the crazy aunt comes in. I told you. And this is how the crazy aunt talks. I told you that wasn't possible for you. What made you think it was? What is wrong with you? How many more times are we going to have to go through this until you learn to stop X, Y, and Z? So the adaptive, protective version of the crazy aunt is to keep you from getting hurt. But it does that by keeping you from taking risks. And so no change is possible as long as the crazy aunt is in charge. So there's a chapter about the crazy aunt in here because it has been a really big presence in my life. And when I realized that she and I, or it and I, it's an ego structure basically, were not the same, it was thrilling to get. Thrilling. Oh, I do not have to listen to that.
Yeah.
And so there are many ways not to listen. You can talk back to the crazy aunt and just say, you think this is a lot that I ate for breakfast, you should see what I ate for dinner last night. Or you can flip it on its side and just say, I heard Martha Beck say this recently, she calls it the Furies, flip it on its side and say the very opposite of what the crazy aunt is saying. You don't belong, I do belong, or you're not enough, and to really sink down into when I am enough. And so the thing about the crazy aunt in the attic and why she's in the attic, and this expression comes from my friend Catherine Ingram, is that if she's in the attic but you're living a couple floors down, it doesn't matter if she's blaring on all day because you're not listening to her. You're living in a different part of the house. That's how much it's possible to disengage.
So is your crazy aunt, you have at least a couple floors between you now?
I have a couple of floors, yes.
Okay.
Yes, right.
I love that.
Yeah.
You know, something you and I have in common is that I believe that women especially have that voice, and that it's a trick of the patriarchy. Because, I say all the time, I don't need a 6'4" white man to follow me around and say, you're stupid, Krista, you're stupid. Because I already have that voice inside my head saying that.
Yeah.
So if patriarchy wants to win, they've done this genius thing of making us all, men and women, self-policing, so they don't have to assign us a physical person to follow us around. And so I was really excited to read your chapter about Gloria Steinem.
Yes.
And do you want to read that?
Yeah,
for us?
read a
Okay,
little bit of
perfect,
that. Yeah. If I were Gloria Steinem. My friend Dave, quoting from multiple sources, once told me that a friend is someone you call when you need to move. A good friend is someone you call when you need to move a body, he said. Isabel is the body-moving kind of friend. Recently, though, she has become a conspiracy theorist. She's convinced that there is a cabal, a congregation of evil lizard people called the Draco, whose intent is to control and ultimately destroy humanity. According to her, the attacks of September 11th were orchestrated by the cabal, so were the Paris attacks and ISIS itself. Also, Vanity Fair, Vogue, most movie stars, politicians, and all billionaires are part of or controlled by the cabal. She says it's like the Matrix, but in real life. We are puppets of the cabal. We think we are free, but we're being hypnotized and manipulated by the ones in power. How do I know I'm not part of the cabal? I ask her. Maybe they got to me in my sleep. You're not important enough, she says. But despite all the websites Isabel cites, the so-called evidence she reels off, I don't believe in the cabal or an objective evil. I do believe there are and have always been confused, misguided people who commit insane acts. Although it seems as if there's an insane world out there, it makes no sense to me that there's an out there that isn't also in here. In different circumstances, with no money, no food, and the promise of a heavenly afterlife, I too would be capable of violence. The day after my conversation with Isabel, I heard Gloria Steinem interviewed on an NPR program. She said that one of the ways the patriarchy controls women is by controlling their reproductive rights and therefore their bodies. She referred to a 1970s panel on abortion. It was comprised of 10 men and 1 nun, she said. You can't make these things up. Then she was asked about today's most pressing women's issues, and she mentioned domestic violence, female genital mutilation, rape, and sex trafficking. I kept waiting for her to mention women and weight, but she didn't, so I will. Because it's almost always defined as a mundane matter of willpower or sloth, weight gets ignored as a political issue. When Gloria was asked about her relationship with food, she mentioned her father who weighed 300 pounds and believed that anything could be cured by a malted and a movie. He was sort of right about that, she said laughingly, and then added that she herself still had a weakness for sweets. That was the point I started thinking about the fact that I don't know of many women who haven't struggled with the size of their bodies. And when a woman's energy is tied up in judging her body, it ties up her power as well. Might this be another way the patriarchy controls women's bodies? By hypnotizing us into believing we must be thin in order to have value or authority? If I wanted to silence half the world, the one most likely to oppose war and guns, I can't think of a better way to do it. Expecting a woman to stand up for what she knows while convincing her that she must first be thin is like binding a Chinese woman's feet and asking her to run a marathon. Are you a Chinese woman?
I'm half Chinese, half Korean. Yes.
Half Chinese and half.
My grandma was the first woman in her family not to have her feet bound.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, as you just said before, we don't need a cabal to enthrall or manipulate or silence us. We've done it ourselves with limitless assistance from the patriarchy by challenging most of our life's energy into having thinner thighs. This doesn't mean that we should join the fat acceptance movement or only blame men for trying to control our bodies. Because even if this whole brouhaha with women, food, and weight is the patriarchy's way to silence us by keeping us focused on impossible goals, we'd still have to do the same thing. Stop allowing it. When we realize we've had duct tape over our mouths for decades, there is only one thing to do: tear it off. Our power is not in blaming or in shaming, but in waking up from the collective trance in which we've been living. We use the same arms we've been told are too fat, and we uncover the same mouths we've been told are too loud, and then we start telling the truth about what we already know, but we don't want to know. There are many ways of truth-telling, but the best way I know is to ask questions. Is it true that when I lose weight, I will have the body and therefore the life I want? Have I ever lost weight? How many times? Aside from having a thinner body, did losing weight fix my relationships with friends, family, or colleagues? If it's such a cure-all, why did I gain it back? Answers like, because I lost my job, my spouse, my best friend, don't count. Answers like, yes, but next time it will be different, are excuses and probably lies. Carolyn Mace, the author of Why People Don't Heal, once said to me, imagine you have a buck of life energy to spend every day. How would you spend it? Start spending that buck differently. Start today, even for 15 minutes, even for 20 minutes. Do something, anything that brings you joy and makes you feel as if you belong here. There isn't a someday. There never was. No one has ever been to the future that you keep putting your life on hold for. All we ever have is now. And if you continually put your life on hold for what your life will be like tomorrow or next year or when you finally lose the weight, you won't recognize that you already have what you want because you will have spent years training yourself to want, not have. Imagine what you would do, I often ask a group of women, if you stopped turning your energy against yourself and use it instead to question what you've been hypnotized into believing about the size of your body and to speak up for what matters to you and your children. What would happen if one woman spoke the truth? Asked the poet Muriel Reichhauser, the world would split open. Let that one be you.
Thank you, Janine.
Yeah.
I felt like our world split open just by hearing those words. Thank you.
You know, I did want to mention that I am doing a master class on this, Women, Weight, and Power, Releasing the Energy of Obsession, which is a free video class that anybody can join. When you put your receipt number in, the receipt number for buying the book, in a place on the website, on the URL JaneenRothBook.com. So write it down and come and join us in the master class. We'll be in April.
Is it a live class where you're on video, or?
It's a live video class.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's a video class. Yeah.
And it's by April 14th, I think
Yes,
I read,
right.
So enter
Yes.
before April 14th
Enter.
on
Yes, enter
Geneen
before
Roth
April.
book.
Yes, JaneenRothBook.com.
Well, you teach at retreats, which are intended by hundreds of women. Your teachings are in your books. You're doing live video. You've changed so many people's lives, and yet what touched me about this messy, magnificent life is your humility. And you talk so honestly about your own ongoing journey and struggles to be happy and at peace in this lifetime. And I'm just wondering, how do you balance being a teacher and a student at the same time?
Lovely question. And thank you for these questions, Krista.
You're so welcome.
Thank you so much.
I wrote
Thank
them
you.
at like 3 a.m. one night. I was just so fueled by passion. Yes.
Well, I can tell. They're beautiful questions.
Thank you.
And you look totally adorable in your pussy hat.
Geneen Roth just said I look adorable,
I mean,
everyone.
seriously. Look at this with the little angora and the ears and these beautiful questions. I'm quite touched by your questions. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah, thank you.
I don't want to interrupt your flow, but let's point out her beautiful necklace.
Oh, God.
She's used the word plumage tonight in her book, and she's literally wearing feathers, and they're this beautiful dark green.
Feathers are good. Turkey feathers. These are turkey feathers. I consider myself actually a student. Even labels like student and teacher, they sort of don't describe the process of always learning and always being curious and just feeling like there's more to see, more to pay attention to. Like with writing this book, it was a constant process of discovery. And so in that way, I feel like I'm a student. When I teach my retreats, I'm in the role of being teacher. And so I take that role on because it's helpful. And it's helpful to have somebody at the front of the room who has been there or is being there and who can be with people as they dive. And so both are great. But mostly it's just a process of humility, of realizing how much I don't know and continuing to learn it and then write about it as I'm learning it. So
I have to follow up with that and ask, so, I've been thinking a lot about the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I'm wondering, as a teacher, how do you not take it personally whether a student succeeds or fails? And I think this applies to all of us because I think all of us have tried to change someone else. I know I have, and I know it's a no-no, but but how can we help someone else but stay unattached to the outcome of it?
I don't know the answer to that because at least with my retreat students, I know well enough that they go at their own paces. And that sometimes, in my own case, I've had to hear something 500 times before it somehow gets through and there's change. And I sort of liken it to, like if you walk over to somebody who's just banging away, hammering away, chiseling away at a rock, and it takes 10 years for them to do it, or 1 year, and you come to them on the second day, then it will look really hard. If you come to them on the last day of the year, when it just splits open,
you could take credit for it.
It will seem really easy. Oh, that was easy. But the thing is that there is no accounting for the pace at which somebody's inner life unfolds. And the other thing is that I feel like for unfolding to happen, you have to really want it.
Yeah.
You have to really want it. You have to want this kind of freedom. And it's not everybody's priority. So some people come to retreats and what they want is to be happy in their relationship with food, and that's great. That's a really big thing to want and to have and to be, and that's enough. I remember when I was part of a spiritual school for 20 years, and somebody would quit. As people would quit, I just couldn't understand. How could they quit? What are they thinking? Why are they doing that? And I remember somebody saying, because he wanted to go backpacking. And I was thinking, really? Backpacking? And so that's what he wanted to do. And so if I'm drawn to do something more than I'm drawn to do inner work, then that's how it is in that moment. And there's no judgment about that. So I know not to do that. And the other thing that's been really difficult for me to realize, I can't convince anybody who doesn't really love me to love me. I tried so hard with that list of unavailable people over and over and over again, just, bending myself upside down, inside out, love me, just being nice, whatever their version was, never worked. it's a bummer. But that's how it goes. And then it's so freeing.
Yeah.
Because then it's alive and it's there and it's wonder and it's magical with the people that it is. And I don't have to look at the negative space with the people that it isn't there with. I think that was the longest time. I was an expert at taking lemonade and turning it into lemons. Just a PhD in suffering. That's where I feel like I was the best.
I'm never going to forget that. It's so good.
So, and I realized I didn't have to live like that, but it took a while.
So beautiful. I think we're going to end with a reading and then Q&A.
Great.
And I got a little heads up. It's going to be Snorkeling in the Night Sky, the original title. Is that right?
Yes, the book
And
cover.
if you guys feel like you don't quite know if you really want that piece, I think the inner piece, I think this chapter might convince you. So anyway.
Although, as we know, nothing can convince you.
Right.
If you're in the same way. Then
Disclaimer, yes.
I'm going to stand up for this. It starts with a Rilke quote. How should we be able to forget those ancient myths about dragons that at the last minute turn into princesses who are only waiting to see us once beautiful and brave? Perhaps everything terrible in its deepest being is something helpless that wants help from us. Night comes swiftly like a great, dark, soft thing. This is me speaking. And for most of my life, I've greeted it reluctantly, as if behind the darkness lurked terror and shattered hearts. My mother says you were a fast napper from the day you were born. Other kids went down for 2 hours and you slept for 20 minutes and were up for the rest of the day. Even as an infant, I didn't want to surrender to that dark, soft thing. After an early menopause, I started waking up 3, 4, 5 times a night. At first, I tried natural remedies, melatonin, bioidentical hormones, cortisol adaptogens, then unnatural ones, drugs. But since I have a paradoxical reaction to drugs, Ambien keeps me awake, and during the second week I took Ativan, I developed suicidal proclivities and wanted to jump off a bridge. I stopped taking drugs. Then I downloaded sleep music, tried brain balancing techniques, listening to books on tape. Middlemarch, Team of Rivals, and A Passage to India are still my favorites. Also anything by Bill Bryson, except that he makes me cackle, which wakes up my husband, which makes 2 of us wide awake at 3 a.m. Still, night after night, my eyes flew open like clockwork, and with them began the rattling of my mind and the descent into the catastrophic. The pain in my chest is congestive heart failure. I know it. The ugly and the uglier. Was that noise a rapist? Do I have a gun? Where is it? No. Oh, right. I don't have one. In her book Marrow, Elizabeth Lesser calls this litany middle of the nightism, and she urges us not to believe any thoughts that occur between midnight and 6 in the morning. To that wise advice, I would add, and stop reading articles that tell you that not getting enough sleep can lead to Alzheimer's, ALS, and autoimmune disease. Particularly if, like me, you might be a teeny bit prone to hypochondria. A few months ago, after lying in bed like a pencil in a drawer for hours each night, trying desperately to be peaceful, and instead feeling insane and judgmental, I decided that if I couldn't sleep, I shouldn't sleep, and that there must be something I could do that didn't require putting on lights, because as every insomniac knows, you're supposed to turn down all lights at dusk, keep your bedroom cool and dark to facilitate ongoing melatonin release. I remembered an article in the New Yorker in which the author says that before the advent of electricity and artificial light, people didn't sleep through the night. They'd sleep when it got dark, sleep 1, and after a few hours they'd wake up, congregate in small groups, and chat convivially. Then they'd trundle off to their stacks of hay and revive themselves with more sleep, which was called sleep too. Visiting friends in the middle of the night, having tea, biscuits, and a chat in flannel pajamas sounds quite civilized to me. Like those newly emergent death cafes where strangers gather to eat cake, drink tea, and discuss death to help them make the most of their finite lives. In a sleepless cafe, strangers could huddle together and discuss being awake in the middle of the night. But since I live in the forest half an hour away from any place where insomniacs might huddle, I decided to start my own nighttime ritual. Now, when my eyes fly open at 3, I follow my breath from my toes to the top of my head and back a few times. Then I do the 4-7-8 sleep breath count. Sometimes I listen to books on tape, but then, if I don't fall asleep, I say in a purposefully cheerful whisper, "Time to go visiting." The cheerful part is necessary to drown out and reprogram the doleful lament at not being able to sleep. I slip into my pink slippers with the floppy felt turquoise flowers, pad into the dark hall with my arms outstretched like a zombie so that I don't bang into walls and trip over chairs, because of course it's very dark. Inch my way to the back door, exchange the slippers for my black knee-high Wellingtons, which I placed by the door the night before, put on my husband's puffy pumpkin-colored Antarctica coat, and grope for the door. I open it, I step down, and then I look up. And just like that, I'm in another world. The glittering bowl of the night sky is so vast that it seems as if I am upside down, like the first time I went snorkeling and saw that the ocean had an underneath, undulating anemones, knobs of rutulent coral, neon purple and green rainbow fish that must have been here all along, but because I never looked below the surface, I never knew. In the middle of the night, with the very first step, I feel as if I am snorkeling in the night sky, gliding around the stars, letting the consummate darkness penetrate my fevered mind. I can't believe that this underneath has been waiting for me all along, and if not exactly terrified of it, I've been highly suspicious of its secrets and vast mysteries. An owl hoots. The sound ricochets against the trees between my thoughts. A mockingbird sings, and the notes feel as if they are rising from my sternum. The wind chimes. They rustle against each other like tiny monastery bells. As my eyes adjust to the dark, I start walking, which feels like swimming. Outside is in, upside is down, the vastness in the sky and the space between my ribs in my chest and inside every cell is hollow and full, nothing and everything. I open my eyes as wide as I can, as if I can scoop the stars up like liquid manna into my throat. Once, twice, 3 times, the arms open, scoop, take in the stars and the darkness that makes them visible. While the trees, noble and immense, bear witness to this exchange of liquid light. Drenched in stillness now, my body moves back to the house, swims down the hallway, moves into bed, and dissolves like the space inside an anemone when it closes, like the deathless beauty of no me, no you, no world. Thank you.
So I believe Ted is going to lead us a little bit.
Yes, it's time for questions. Around here, questions start with a W or an H, sometimes a D. They are generally short. There's no such thing as a 2-part question, and only Krista gets to ask follow-up questions. Who wants to go first?
Hi, Janine.
Hi.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. A good friend of mine could not be here, so I'm here for her, but I love listening to you and about the book, and she shared a lot of things with me because she's read several of your books. And my question to you is, how do you disengage from that story, from that crazy aunt that you're speaking of in your head? What are tools that you use to be able to do that?
Well, it's a practice and a process, and so I'll tell you very laser version like what it is. The first thing is to realize that you have one. Most people don't realize that, and so to name it. So I believe that seeing is freeing. And when you see it and name it and recognize it, there's an immediate separation. Oh, it's not me. You can write down the different things the ant or that GPS is telling you, write it down in the you person. And what I do in retreats and workshops is I have people feel the impact of it, because we don't realize how painful it is to talk to ourselves like that. We don't get it because we've been doing it for so long, and those neural pathways are so grooved in there that we just don't get how painful it is. And when you feel the impact, you suddenly realize, whoa, I wouldn't talk to anybody like that. I wouldn't let anybody talk to my kids like that. And yet I'm talking to myself like that and believing it. So that's just sort of the beginning. And then you come up with what I call disengagements, what would work, whether it's humor or no, whether it's you're not my friend, go away. You know, it takes time. It takes a lot of, it takes support and it takes vigilance to become aware when you're at the effect of it. The way that I know I'm at the effect of it now these days is that I feel collapsed in some way. I've been just scooting along, skipping along, everything is fine, and then suddenly I'm not feeling so good, or I feel small or paralyzed or collapsed, and then I realize, something is going on. I'm telling myself and I'm believing it, or the crazy aunt is operating here and I'm believing it. So I track back from how I feel and then see what happened. I'm not always aware of it in the moment.
I'm going to add something I've learned from your book, which is that I think you should tell your friends about this concept, about this book, tell them to buy the book. And because when your friends know about this concept, they can call you out on it. Like when you're worried, like, oh, is that the crazy aunt in the attic? Because that's what, Matt did for you one day in one of your chapters. I thought
You
that
really
was
read that book,
I
didn't
really
you?
read it, yeah.
Yes, he did. That's in the chapter, which is called The Crazy. Oh, no, is it called it? There's been so many different names for that chapter. It might be called Hoodwinked by Suffering. But it is about that, because the crazy aunt is the definition of suffering, or believing the crazy aunt. The crazy aunt is just fine until you start believing. And that's when you start suffering.
Do you want to talk about your touchstones? Actually, the last chapter has amazing, it's sort of one paragraph. How would you describe the touchstones?
Well, they're the process. They're what I realized I was following throughout writing the book that I didn't realize I was doing till I finished the book. But you can read them in the book. I think this is the time for you to have questions if you have them.
Yes.
And
I have
so
a
I don't
question.
want to take that away.
Oh, yeah, we're not going to read it. I'm just saying, be aware.
Yes,
So
yes.
much wisdom here. Yeah, what's the next question?
Yes.
I have a question. And this has been so wonderful hearing your story, and I very much relate to everything that you've been saying tonight. What is your writing process like? I know all of us who are writers have that voice all the time, so I'm very curious about what lets you do what you do. Thank you.
Let's see. I think I don't actually have a process, to tell you the truth. When I am working on a book, then I'm quite disciplined about it. I have two signs in my kitchen. One says "ass in chair," to remind me that the only way I'm going to get any writing done is to get my butt out to my writing studio. It's not going to happen by me puttering around in my kitchen and doing this and doing that. And I was going to say cleaning out drawers, but I actually don't ever clean out the drawers. So it's not, that's what a lot of writers say. They get their drawers really clean when they're procrastinating, but that's not what happens to me. I let something, well, actually, before I tell you this, I will just pay homage, because no writer, I realize, ever does anything by herself. And the angel of my life was my editor, Peg Parkinson, who my first book, I didn't have an agent, and I sent out 26 book proposals, and 25 of them were rejected. And she wrote back and said, I'd love to see your book. I said I did have a book, but I didn't have a book. I had the beginnings of a book and many submissions, because it's an anthology, and I talked my way into seeing her in New York. And we just sort of fell in love with each other. She started calling me every 2 weeks. Where's your book? Where's your book? I kept saying, I'm writing. It's almost there. You're going to have it. You're going to have it. It's coming. And then after 2 months, I couldn't stand it anymore, and I called her and I said, I've been lying to you this entire time. I don't have a book. I don't care if I ever have a book. This pressure is too much for me. Thank you, goodbye. And she said, I believe in you. I don't know why she believed in me. She had never seen anything I had written except the book proposal. I believe in you. Here's my home number. Call me anytime. And that changed my life, because I felt like somebody believed in my writing, whereas my dad had said to me, and bless his heart, but he had said to me, you think you can write a book? You know, somebody submitted Charles Dickens' book to the publisher without Charles Dickens' name, and it got turned down. And it's like, ooh, who am I to think I can write? So Peg opened that door for me. And then I sat down and I wrote my part of Feeding the Hungry Heart, my first book, in 6 weeks. So it just, every time I write, I think about Peg. I still have her big stuffed pencil that she had hanging above her desk, hanging in my writing studio now. So, in between books, which is what I am now, I don't really have a writing process. I will write ideas down. I will, or sometimes I won't. Annie Lamott, who wrote the introduction to this and is a good friend of mine, always carries a pencil and an index card in her pocket, and I've tried to do that, but I always forget. Or else I carry a pen and the pen bleeds all over my clothes, and I'm not willing to do that, so then I don't have a pen, and then I forget the index card, and so I end up writing on the back of receipts, and then I throw the receipts away. And so I don't really have a defined process. What I can say is, once I start, I'm vigilant about the process. I don't go out to lunch. That's what I'm doing, is I'm writing a book. And partly it's because of love, because I love writing, but partly it's because I know that if I don't do it, it's not going to get done. And I have to tolerate the many, 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 many slog days of nothing's coming, and I hate writing, and I feel sorry for myself, and I hate all my friends who are going out to lunch with their friends at pretty restaurants with geraniums in the window boxes, and I'm sitting here with a sentence for 3 days and I just, and nobody cares, and what makes me think anybody even cares about what I think or feel, and it's just like that. So, that's my writing process.
Thank you.
What does the second sign in your kitchen say?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
No morning phone calls. I love talking on the phone in the morning. And Matt gets up and, he goes out to his little office out there, and and so he's working, and I just want to talk. And so then there's Izzy, our dog, who, you know, can't really carry on a conversation that well. She can wag her tail. And so I just want to get on the phone, and I want to call a friend and schmooze and have a little, you know, half-hour whatever. And when I'm writing, I can't, because those are so interesting, those conversations. Much more interesting than getting out to my writing studio, especially if I'm in the middle of something that's not coming. And it just takes a lot of persistence. So that's what the second thing says.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, Janine. I had another question about your process.
Yeah.
So, like your beautiful friend Anne Lamott, do you write shitty first drafts and then go back and rework, or do some just come through you just perfectly formed? Is it different with each chapter? Do you have sorry, it's more than one. Do you have chapters that got discarded from this book? Answer
Yes.
any of those that you want.
And nothing comes whole like that. I am very much like Annie in that way. I write, I don't know, probably for this book, which is really not a very big book, I've written 15 drafts of it, maybe 20 drafts of it, and every piece gets rewritten that many times. So I'm not a, oh, it came out whole, oh, it's fabulous. No, I have reworked it and reworked it and reworked it. And every day I go back, and I don't think Annie does this, but I go back and I rework what I did the day before. So I start out reworking what I did the day before I even get to the new material, and that could take, you know, an hour, 2 hours, probably no more than 2 hours, and then I get onto the new material, and you know, depending on that day, I'm either happy or I'm really discouraged. I'm really discouraged, and I'm just wondering why I ever decided to become a writer. It's like that. But the love pulls me through. The love of the craft, the love of language, the love of words, and the fact that when I write on the good days, I disappear. I'm not there. It's the things that make me, my thoughts, my personality, my beliefs, gone, completely gone. It's like just being a channel for whatever to come through, and I love that. I love disappearing, and writing is the way that happens most frequently for me. It happens through meditating too, but but not always. I mean, sometimes it's just, wow, one thought after another thought after another thought. I can't believe I've been meditating for 30 years, for God's sakes. So, in fact, I've stopped calling it meditation because my version of meditation really doesn't resemble the meditation that I've been taught to do from all those retreats that I took. It's a whole different thing that I'm doing than I think I was supposed to be learning how to do. But I like my version, and that's fine. Writing is just a way of disappearing through love, really. And it's. I feel like, you know, the top of my head is just connected to the sky, but then I feel sometimes like I don't even have a head, or I'm not even there, and then the bottom is to the middle of the earth, but then I'm not there anyway, so it doesn't even make a difference. It's sort of, you know, the little match girl. I was talking about the little match girl before. It is the way I know I belong here, because it feels so right. And I mean, when I'm with Matt, I'm not talking about what it feels like to be in relationship, to be with Matt, to actually be next to another human being. Writing is such a solitary process. It's so solitary, and it dispels and quells all of those feelings. I mean, I feel like I'm doing what I was put here to do. And so I just keep doing it.
And our final question for the evening.
Hi.
You're such an inspirational writer. Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful work. I'm wondering, are there writers that you turn to for inspiration as well? Like, who do you turn to? You did that beautiful Rumi quote, but are there writers in particular that you turn to when you need to feel opened up and inspired?
Well, I love Annie's writing. I love George Eliot's writing. I really love her writing. Let me see who I've been reading recently in terms of fiction writing. So the language of fiction, and when somebody crafts a sentence that's so gorgeous. I can't really think of anybody right now, but there are so many. Bill Bryson, I listen to a lot in the middle of the night before I go snorkeling in the night sky, because, as I said in here, he's so funny and so optimistic. And so I turn to different writers for different things. It depends on where I am and what I feel, what kind of food I'm needing in that moment. That will, I'll read Rumi, I'll read Rilke. I like Mary Oliver. Recently, I've been into this poet, Liesl Mueller. I love her poetry. So poetry is a quick way for me because it's so concise and distilled, and there's so much is packed in a sentence or an image, and that is transporting to me. Yeah, so thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.